Hey everybody, this is Bethany Bauman. I'm the VP of Nonprofit Digital Strategy at Paradise and PM Digital and also a proud member of the IMAB Integrated Marketing Virtual Conference Committee. So we hope everyone's really enjoyed the day. I know that we got great feedback on some of the sessions. I've been watching Twitter. We've had some awesome tweets, so it sounds like everybody enjoyed the content that was out there today. You all will definitely be getting an attendee survey in the next day or two. We'd love to know your brutal and honest opinion of our first conference here and what we can do better next year. Really proud for all of the great content that everyone came up with. And would like to thank NTEN and Amy Sample Ward for joining us here and hosting our virtual roundtable. We want to take a few minutes and let each of our presenters go through key takeaways from their presentations earlier today so that those of you who couldn't stay with us for all 6 hours of sessions, you know, we all had work to do, so that you can get a flavor of what each one of the sessions were about. These sessions will be available on starting Tuesday. They'll be recorded on the IMAB website, so please feel free to check out if after you hear the key takeaways there's one you want to go back and dig into further. And with that, I will hand it over to Amy Sample Ward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bethany, and thank you for having me and NTEN be a part of this. I know that Maureen said right before we went on air that she was excited to hear from you afterwards how it went, and I am too. I feel like there's so much potential for conversations around these topics, and it feels like we're walking our talk by using multiple channels all day long to be having the conversation, but I know from the organizer's perspective, it can be such a challenge to bring people who are in all different time zones and all different organizations together just for these little snippets of time throughout the day. So thanks to everyone who has participated and stuck with the program of small snippets of conversation over the day. And thank you to all of the presenters who stuck around for this discussion. And I'm eager to learn how it went and if there are things NTEN can learn from what you've tried today, and hopefully we can keep helping you in the future. So to get started, everyone, please do use the chat avidly. Feel free to post your questions for any or all of the presenters in the chat. You can say, you know, this is a question just for Jeff, or I'm wondering about this in general, and I will be feeding those questions in. I do, of course, have my own agenda, so I will have some questions to throw out at the presenters, but hopefully you can start queuing up those questions. We're actually going to run through a little bit of recaps from each of the presentations today, so it might get your mind triggered on a couple questions. Feel free to share those as soon as you think about them, and I will do my best to make sure we cover all of them in this last session. So make sure our slides are working great. There's me, whatever. You know who I am, but more importantly, we're going to hear from all of our presenters. Like I said, use that chat. Use it like it is everything you've ever wanted to share in the world. We definitely want to hear from you. That's why we have this wrap-up session. So we're going to go down the line. Presenters ready?
Yes, ma'am.
First up.
Oh. Do you want to just read our key takeaways? Sorry.
However you'd like to recap them is fine. If you have a specific thing that you wanted to highlight out of here, or however you wanted to remind everyone about the full session you had earlier.
Okay, this is Terry Burton. I presented with Jen Sachs earlier today. And essentially we talked about some of the things that we've done in our program to develop a multi-channel vision for long-term and short-term engagement. And the principal things that we do is approach every single project with a multi-channel vision and understanding what the long-term and short-term goals are, as well as the benefits for that. We sort of trump the conventional wisdom in terms of the number of solicitations and how much you reach out to your high-dollar donors. We do it frequently, and one of the things that everyone just needs to figure out is what works for their audience. High touch works for us, and so we do it through mail as well as email.
no one has figured out how to monetize social media. Change focus to building awareness for your institution that can have a benefit in other areas. The bottom line is we found that you can't rely on social media as a source of income, even with social focus initiatives such as Giving Tuesday. But social media is great in other ways, like brand awareness. Plus, a large social media following can help in other fundraising areas, such as securing grants. It's not quantity, it's quality. If messaging goes back to mission and the original case for support, they will remain engaged. We send a lot of messaging, which goes against every best practice that's ever been taught, ever. But we have a lot going on, and we make sure to send only emails that are relevant to our mission and our organization. Every audience is different, and it's just important to test, and test some more to learn what works best for your audience.
Excellent. All right. Let's see who is next up on our list here. Maureen, I believe this one's yours. I think I've been on mute. Okay, hi, I'm here, I'm here. We can hear you now. Can you hear me? Okay, fabulous. So we had a really good time in our session. It was myself and Mark Rovner from Sea Change Strategies and a client of Fireflies, a woman named Carrie from Be the Match Foundation. And we spent some time looking at the next gen data that really, really reflected something that I think it's important for all of us to remember, and I heard a thread of it in the takeaways just a second ago, that all channels are relevant, whether you're a mature or you're a Gen Z or a millennial, you use these channels. And the job of the nonprofit or the communicator is really to identify what to send through what channel. And in kind of thinking about folks in personas, who is the mature to you? Who's a boomer? Who's a Gen Xer? And what do they need? So we really looked at the data through that lens, and we also spent some time looking at Carrie's Be the Match on Campus program for Be the Match. It's a place for college campuses to have a web presence. It's peer-to-peer fundraising, and it's to raise awareness, raise money, and also to increase the number of college-age kids who join the Marrow Registry to really save people's lives every day. And we had to get inside the heads of these kids and come up with something that was fully responsive, spoke their language, had integrated text messaging, not text to give. But yeah, I want to know when you guys are on my campus. Send me a text. They're seeing great results, great campus adoption, and they really had to let go of some assumptions and get into test mode to be able to know a program like this is going to have a long tail. So some of the key takeaways here are communications aren't going to raise money yet, but it's easy to start the relationship. You've got a bunch of different channels you can use to start that relationship with younger folks. I feel so old saying it like that. Begin building those relationships. It's not too early. Experiment. When you think about Gen Y, Gen Z, or millennials, that's what they're about, testing assumptions, experimentation. Try to include testing time, you might hear that from all of us, in your campaigns. If you can bake in an extra 48 hours so you can try an A/B test inside your communication tools and send the winner, especially if it's something that's a little edgy for you and your organization, try it with a small little population. See if it's leaving people cold or they're actually taking more action. Mobile is not optional anymore for any of us, so if you haven't done it, go there now. And think about images. Images are what drives shared content right now. Great images can be shared on Facebook, on Pinterest, on people's blogs, all over the place. So think about the images and your content. They're equal drivers of action. That's about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Maureen. Let's see who is next.
I think that would be, this is Bethany, and I presented earlier in the day with Michaela King, who is the VP of Integrated Marketing at Defenders of Wildlife, and she had a great case study around the Wyoming wolf delisting campaign that they did across all channels, direct mail, social, mobile, email, you name it, they used it, and ended up with about $300,000 in 5 weeks, and a lot of advocacy success as well to fund their next campaign to protect the wolves. So we talked a lot about, now we have all of these channels available to us, and there are different audiences in each, and a lot of audiences overlap. So how do we actually pick which channels make the most sense for our fundraising campaigns and our advocacy campaigns? So we broke down each of the individual channel strengths and then looked at them as they coupled together one-on-one, and then looked at the case study. So really the underlying themes for our presentation: playing to a channel strength is the key to successful integration. We defined 4 elements that really define strength or weakness of a channel. Things like depth of content that you can present in that channel, timeliness of that channel, that sort of thing. So really knowing which channel is defined by the things that will make it strong or weak for you for what you're asking it to do. Knowing your audience, of course, that is, I think, a theme you'll hear from all of us, whether it be knowing where your Gen Ys live or, you know, the strange generation that is Gen X, that can be direct mail affected but are online transactional. Really knowing who's on your file, who's missing from your file, and who you need to go after. Establishing campaign goals and milestones. You'll definitely, I'm sure this will come up during questions, is how do you plan an integrated campaign? When looking at the integration, especially with our Wyoming wolf delisting example, the campaign goals were not just monetary. We were looking for signatures on a petition, looking for monetary goals as well at 3 different stages of the campaign. So part of measuring success was knowing about what we could expect from the file and reach that we were doing at the different phases of the campaign. And really all that was about setting up the tracking and measurement schema ahead of time for the campaign. So I think that's about it, Amy.
Awesome. And we already have a question from Monica, which we'll get to after the recap. So shout out to Monica for being the first. And everyone else, this is your peer pressure to get your questions in while they come to mind while we're going through these recaps. Let's see who is up next.
Hi, everyone. This is Jeff Handy, and I talked today about the best way to integrate mission-related messaging and fundraising-related messaging in an organization. And one of my points was that the media landscape is changing and changing rapidly. I mean, 2 years ago, how many of us have heard of Pinterest? None of us, because it hadn't been invented yet. And we have to have a conversation about, is Pinterest a valid area for us to invest time and energy and money into developing? And more importantly, you need to adapt your organizational culture to one of constant evaluation and adaptation. It's really no longer enough to say, when the next big thing comes on, like mobile, to say, hey, we should probably get on this, but do you have a discipline in place to actually evaluate these things as they come on? And I talked about one of our budgeting processes called the New Initiatives Budget, which basically allows any HSU staff person to propose a new initiative if they can either can break even within a reasonable amount of time, which historically has been 12 months for us, or they can get, for example, a major donor to seed the campaign, after which HSUs will pick it up in years 2 and beyond. And that's an example of a structure that's worked really well for us. Second point I made was that goal agreement is critical. We all know this. When our goal agreement lags is when we have the most trouble. And I talk to a lot of people, particularly in the area of simple websites. You know, what is the goal of the web? Is it fundraising? Is it 100% fundraising? For us, it's fundraising and advocacy. And that clarity is really, really helpful. You know, we have people who say, well, you know, it's about content. No, it's not about content. It's about outcomes. It's about education engagement. Well, no, it's not really about education engagement unless they lead to the outcomes that we want, which is taking an action or making a donation. And this goal agreement takes a lot of work. And I think we all have different organizational structures. The structure is hard to change an organization. Sometimes you have to wait for staff departures. People are very secure in where they are. And if you can only change one, do a goal agreement. You can get agreement on goals across different departments and organization. It's tough, but it's a lot easier. That said, obviously, if you can get the perfect structure, that's always going to help you. The other point I made is conflict creates excellence. If you don't have conflict, you're not doing the best job that you can. And the website, obviously, is a great example of this. You know, I fight. I fight for the percentage of, I'm a fundraiser, I fight to make sure that if someone sees our ad on TV and ends up on our homepage, they know where to go. And our advocacy folks fight back and say, you know, we're beyond fundraising. Our mission is not just fundraising. We need a balance. And if you look at our website, it kind of reflects that conflict. So I may get, you know, my face may get all red. I may get really, really upset. But at the end of the day, we're better off because of that conflict, because overall we manage it pretty well. And on occasion, I'll buy someone a beer just to relax things. The fourth point is integrated campaigns allow you to package the same content and appeals across multiple channels. So if you're running an integrated campaign and you know the action, you know the creative, you know the offer, you can actually deploy that across channels fairly efficiently. And obviously, you have to, you know what you have to do to write a tweet. You know the character limit. You know you know how to use a Bitly link. You know all the tricks of each channel. But the action is the same and it's established. And what we do, for example, in email campaigns, is we have the same individual write the emails for actions and the emails for donation asks, the thank you content, etc. So they live and breathe a particular campaign, and they're skilled in all the elements of advocacy and fundraising by email. The fourth point I made is the secondary goals are valid too. You know, I'm talking a lot about advocacy and fundraising driving the bus here, but at times you have to have secondary goals. And one example is we have content on our website about how to care for guinea pigs. You know, it's mission-related education, and it doesn't tie neatly into advocacy and fundraising, but it's something we need to do. We're proud of doing. We have a lot of people visit this page, believe it or not, every year. And so what we do, though, is we try and take a bridge between that kind of a content and our main goals. So if you look at our guinea pig content, we actually invite visitors to that page to sign a petition to stop animal testing on rodents like guinea pigs. And that's how we start a relationship with the person who's going to our site just for information on caring for their guinea pig. And finally, I talked about how to optimize each channel based on what makes it unique. I think a classic example is social. Social is a conversation. So we respond to every question in a reasonable amount of time, no exceptions. We do a lot of donor service through Facebook as well. That obviously ties into donor satisfaction and revenue in the long term, but it's something that's unique to social. So in Facebook is a conversation, and we've designed organization in our Facebook approach to recognize the reality of that channel. Very different, say, from mail or email. And that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. I had a guinea pig when I was little. His name was Rex.
Great. Sign our pledge.
Will do. Who is up next? Heather?
Oh, that looks like me.
Oh.
This is Mike from Boys Town.
Hi, Mike.
Hey, mine was pretty much around budgeting. And what we were doing there was, what we're trying to do on our side is we've got a solid direct mail program. We're trying to layer the interactive on top, or the integrated marketing on top of that, and we've tested a number of different things. A lot of things to keep in mind, and especially to educate everybody within the organization, is sometimes this stuff takes years to develop. So we used 2012 as a baseline. In 2013, we added some TV and some outside emails that we went to. It's really important that in a budgetary process, or as you're going through that for the year, that these other channels which build awareness are in addition to a lot of your existing programs and not in place of. And we're trying to do a cause and effect now on a lot of the different things and test them as we go. We have not found much of them yet. What we have found is when we'll do an email campaign or people that come in through the web are already an established donor through the mail. So we're actually, a lot of our donors are not because they're older. But as the key point to take away is just let the results drive your decisions. And there again, you're going to have different ones for marketing. It's going to be more on awareness than it is an ROI for direct mail program. On that second point, target your message to your audience, not necessarily, I wasn't talking about your outside audience. I kind of focused on communicating within your organization to kind of build that understanding and with board members, with senior management, with everybody to get some kind of consensus so that everybody understands that they need everything. It's not just simply us against them. Something, cut acquisition for the sake of web. It almost has to be in addition to. And also be consistent in your format measurements and use your historical data to make your case and start a historical database so that you can build on top of that. And then also from a direct mail perspective, which is what the last point is transition the focus from the cost containment expense side of it more to revenue and net profit per donor and really look at your business that way going forward. That was pretty much a summary of mine.
Great, Mike. You make it sound like that's all super easy to do. Thank you.
It's not.
All right.
Hi, this is Heather, and I presented just before this session on balanced scorecards. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with balanced scorecards, but maybe this one should have gone at the beginning of the day instead of the end of the day, because this really was the underlying strategy that would help to enable many of the processes that the other initiatives that the other presenters spoke to. So a balanced scorecard is really a strategic planning and management framework that's used extensively in the business and industry and government sectors. And now with the transition of many leaders from those sectors into the nonprofit world, we're seeing more and more balanced scorecard approach to strategy. So a balanced scorecard really works to align the vision and the strategy of the organization to the work of the organization. And it helps to improve internal and external communications. And the most important piece is that it really focuses on performance metrics as it relates to your different strategic goals. This is a tool that has been around since and invented in the early 90s, but just this past year, the survey was done of business leaders from around the world, and it's become the fifth most widely used management tool. So why aren't nonprofits using it more? And that's what we spoke about. We're looking at how it can transform organizations. So when you build a balanced scorecard, you look at the organization or your fundraising and marketing from 4 different perspectives: the financial perspective, your stakeholder perspective, which in the case of fundraising and marketing is your donor or your constituents, your internal processes, and finally learning and growth. So we went through each of those 4 perspectives in our session to talk about what were some of the key initiatives and the key unique features of the balanced scorecard approach, and talk through some of the performance measures. The interesting thing about a balanced scorecards is after you go through all of your initiatives, you get to do this neat exercise called strategy mapping, where you look at all of the interdependencies and how all of your different initiatives are connected to one another. And you start to see the integration taking shape before your eyes as you start to look at the cross-functional teams that are going to need to come together in order to achieve mission effectiveness and achieve growth and achieve those high-level strategic objectives. And then my colleague Mark, who came from the for-profit sector and now has been the CEO at Christian Children's Fund Canada, is putting all of this theory into practice in his own organization. And
whereas most of us have strategic plans that might sit on a dusty shelf, his 6-year strategic plan is used to train and orient new staff and sits on everybody's desk and is the go-to guide for not just the high-level strategies of the organization, but cascades all the way down to the performance metrics and the performance measures for each individual staff person. So I hope it was a very fruitful session for those that attended, and those that have never heard of a balanced scorecard till now, I hope you take the opportunity to search online and read about it, and you'll see that it really is starting to transform organizations, maybe even yours.
Great. Thanks, Heather.
You're welcome.
All right. We have finally reached open discussion time with bated breath. Everyone has been waiting, I'm sure. Peer pressure call out again. Reminder to put your questions in the chat bar on the side of your screen. I do have a long list of questions myself, but we'll definitely try to prioritize questions from all of you on the webinar now. So I'm actually going to go back to Monica's question that she posted right at the beginning. Either she's had it in her mind all day or she was inspired right at the beginning. So Monica says, how to convince a financially struggling nonprofit to invest in a marketing campaign that was focused with the goal of accessing new money, even if that's a situation when they may have to dig into their reserves. Anyone have thoughts to share with Monica?
I'll say something. This is Heather. I would say, you know, I've been in a similar situation, and it sometimes is a difficult concept for CFOs to wrap their head around, especially if they come from the accounting background. But if you can start to have a conversation about long-term value or lifetime value, especially if you're looking at a program around monthly acquisition or monthly conversion that often takes a higher level of investment, if you can start to present models that show that long-term value and how that ultimately is going to impact the health of the organization over time, sometimes you can get good footing there.
And hi, this is Bethany, just weighing in on this question. It's very common one that comes up with our clients all the time of how far do you invest, given, you know, all of us are in financially strapped situations, and it's fairly easy to take your existing file and sort of project out how much it can earn you. And I think that that's a really relevant exercise to put in front of your CFO or your CEO of, if you don't invest, you can actually sort of see the lifespan of the existing donors that you have. So if you know how many are coming in, rarely will you have any kind of break even until you infuse that acquisition money or the marketing campaign money. So that's usually a good basic place to start.
Yeah, I agree. This is Jeff from the Humane Society. It's you know, we all know that if you decrease acquisition during an economic downturn, you're extending the downturn for your charity for a number of years. You have to invest, and you need to know what the likely ROI is on any investments. You can choose the right investments, but you know, we know money doesn't do well in a mattress. You gotta put it in the bank if you want to be conservative, or put it in the stock market if you want to grow. And there's an element of risk in donor acquisition. You know, it can be managed. It should be managed, but you know, you're not going to achieve your mission if you're static and not willing to take those risks at acquiring new donors.
Awesome. So while we're talking about money, another question has come in. Why is restricted revenue such a hot button for your finance department?
Well, this is Mike from Boys Town. I can answer that in one way. I can give you a specific example. We had one of our sites who would, a generous gift from a donor came in addition to, let's say, open another home for kids. Well, that's all well and good, but it was restricted for that purpose, which for the first year or two it was financially feasible for us to do it. Well, then you get to year 3 and 4, and all of a sudden the ongoing costs of that restricted gift come into play. And so when a CFO or somebody sees a restricted gift, especially when they look at the outlying years and they go, wow, this is going to cost us in years 2, 3, 4, and 5, it becomes a very difficult investment, or even a gift to accept sometimes. So that just gives you kind of an example there. They have more freedom as well. What we try to do with restricted gifts, if anything, is point the restricted gift to something that's already a budgeted item. And in that way, you can free that money up for other things that the organization may want to do. It's kind of a little bit of a trust factor, but a give and take between finance and development.
Great example. And Mike, while you're on, there was also a question just for you about Boys Town's use or lack of use of telemarketing.
You know what? That has always been a bias in our. We've had a bias against it. We did do some. I guess we did do some telemarketing back in the late 90s. It's just been one of those things. I think it's because we've been around so long that we control all the infrastructure pretty much for everything we do. Like we have a letter shop for a direct mail campaign. We have a call center for our donors to call in. That if we can't manage it, we really don't want to do it. Plus, it's, you know, you've got that perception, much like you do on everything else, that it's an inconvenience to the donors and that you're bothering them. I would think if we wanted to do telemarketing, the best way we could do it would be a thank you call to the donors to start off with. But that's still something that we struggle with internally.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thanks for taking us on that side note there. Make sure that question was answered. So back over a little bit more on the money side of things and thinking about our strategies there. Another question has come in for anyone on the panel about why we're not just focusing on the most profitable donors, renewing and staying on as donors, or focusing on other revenue. Anyone want to weigh in there?
Well, on something like that, it goes back to the example of cutting acquisition, that basically you're going to lose about 30% of your, we do anyway, we lose about 30% of our file every year, and unless we go out and acquire new donors, that quickly turns into a deficit, and it hits the net income rather rapidly, probably by year 2 or year 3, and then you really start to fall on. And someone else made the point earlier, I think it was Jeff, that if you don't, if you really don't invest in acquisition, that you turn into almost, your program turns into almost like a death spiral, that after the first year 2 or year 3, you're not replacing donors and your file shrinks dramatically, and with it, net income in future outlying years.
I think the other piece to the argument of not just focusing on your most valuable donors in the current state is that usually within an organization you've got a lot of folks on file who aren't donors yet, but they're invested in your mission in some way, potentially as a volunteer, as a content consumer, and it may take a year, 2 years for them to actually transact with you, but often once they do, they're incredibly loyal. Because they are at a certain point where they're ready to actually give you a donation, as opposed to, say, early on in a diagnosis when they're just leaning on you for help managing a disease or leaning on you for getting through what they want to with their animal welfare, things like that. So I think you have to give a chance for the folks that are already in that kind of warm acquisition pool to warm up.
This is Jeff from the Humane Society. I agree that it's not an either-or proposition, but I do think it's strategically smart to take the 20% of your donors who give you 80% of the revenue and do something extra for them and try and figure out what that extra could be. So I'm a big Chuck Longfield fan from Blackbaud. I suspect many of you are as well. And you know, he sings the praises of thank you calls for new to file donors, which we're doing. And, you know, it's a no-brainer for someone who makes a single gift of $100 or more. That thank you call is a no-brainer investment. But what about 50, or what about 25? You know, we know that the former is a necessity, but how low can and should we go to make that investment actually pay off down the road? I think too, you know, we're experimenting now with separate emails or an augmented email program from our major donors to try and move them up our giving pyramid. And it's going really, really well, but it's a lot of work. It's a pretty small segment numerically for us, but the potential of taking a $500 donor up higher is really massive. And I do think that you know, we should be focusing a lot of energy. I would say at the Humane Society, we haven't been focusing enough on those most profitable donors.
So let's talk about donors then. We have a question from an attendee. Churn is inevitable, and Mike even touched on you having 30% turnover, for example. So what's contributing to making that something that's not a given number? What's influencing the number of new and the number of laps each year, and what's kind of shifting how some years maybe there's a lot more laps and a lot fewer new, and then the next year there's more of both? Or how have you seen that in your organizations at least get moved around from year to year?
Sometimes you have external factors that play into that, the economy a little bit. If interest rates fall, for instance, our population, the donor base is relatively older, 65, 70. Those folks are living off of interest. When interest rates reduce, they tend to pull back maybe a little bit more. They have to choose with which charity they're going to give to. Because in our business, basically those folks aren't given to just one charity. They're given to, anywhere from 2, 3, 4, 5. And there are some external factors. Some of what we've noticed too is in the past, we really go by our results at this point in time. But in the past, sometimes we would do what we wanted to and not what we thought, what the results, we wouldn't believe the results. And when you get into that kind of a trap, oftentimes you're doing what doesn't reactivate and retain donors. You're doing what maybe you want to do or what you think is the right thing rather than what the results are telling you. And there again, too, it goes back to testing. You have to be able to test. 20, 30% of your program should be with testing so that you can reinvent yourself. One of the things I noticed when I first took this job is we had all our campaigns dating back to 1936. And I went over to the archives and looked at them. And the one thing that I noticed is a campaign or a concept had about a 5-year lifespan. And after, you go back to some of those campaigns and they would do the same one for 5 years and then boom, all of a sudden it's different. Well, you've got to almost reinvent yourself and you keep your branding the same, but you do have to reinvent yourself from time to time.
And I'd add to that, and I'd say not needing to go back to the 30s necessarily, but I'd look at year over year. I find often people make decisions. The plan was on paper in January or whenever the start of your fiscal year was, and things have shifted. So your communication outbound through any channel may have changed just enough from 2012, 2011, go and see what you did. Was there a story that had legs in one year that didn't the following year? Did you skip a campaign? Did you send out less in the lower performing year, or vice versa? So I'd go back and do some comparisons. What's the same and what's different?
Awesome. Great point, Maureen. And so on that note, this is a question that we get at NTEN all the time and see posted to the community. So whether you are trying to figure something out for budgeting purposes or, and not that these are exclusively different things, or you're trying to focus on a campaign plan, there's often this struggle around identifying the right data to use to set those first goals or to set those benchmarks. So if you aren't necessarily someone who's started your job and the person before you had already been doing this, you really want to maybe be the first person to say, hey, here's some benchmarks. I want to prove my point. I think we could do this campaign. Here are the goals, or here's the budget I want, and here's the data, but you're not really sure where to get that or what's really reliable because this is the first go at it. What tips do you have for those folks?
Boy, from our end, I find that vendors are a tremendous source of market information. I mean, vendors where they bring their value to the organization to a certain extent is they're in contact with a number of different nonprofits. They're actually out there kind of seeing what works. While they don't have to necessarily tell you X, Y, and Z works, they kind of lead you in that way. Say, hey, this kind of worked. We saw this work for someone else. Maybe you should try it. and you don't necessarily do it in the same way, but you add your own twist to it, so to speak, so that it matches what your messaging points are, your content, and the audience you're kind of targeting.
Great. I think someone else was trying to jump in with an answer as well. All right. No. I think you just answered so well that no one else has to jump in there. So I'm going to do another peer pressure reminder. Send in any of your questions to the chat on the side of your screen, and we will get those prioritized. So let's move slowly but surely away from the budgeting side of the conversation. And now you have had this, successful program, you run a really great campaign, or maybe what you tried to do wasn't that straightforward. So you're trying to figure out the ROI, this thing that you had taken, 6 months earlier. I want this budget, I'm going to do this campaign, but it wasn't just a campaign where you had a direct mail piece that asked for money, and you can say this is how much it cost and this is how much came in. What about those gooier, even advocacy or even community building primary goal campaigns? Any tips for folks trying to figure out the return on investment when they're really running something that doesn't have a direct ask in that way?
Sometimes it's helpful, although the financial amongst us won't find it so helpful. What will it cost you not to do it? What might you leave on the table? What opportunity might you miss? And I think that in terms of goal setting, pad out the monetary. Don't just focus on the monetary goal. You should be doing this because you have a couple of goals. You want to raise awareness. You want to get your petition signed. You should have a couple of other measures, new folks, shares, things like that. You're looking to measure a bunch of different things, I guess, for ROI and not just dollars.
I think, this is Bethany, one of the things that I've had to do in the past was the value of something as simple as an email address and the ratio of our email file to our fan base. So, all of the arguments I've had to make have had to be rooted in finance. So I had to put a number to that, even as gooey, Amy, I think that's a really good word for it, as it might be. So even though you have emails on file where somebody hasn't given, what's the value of having them there? Because there is a potential that they will graduate from that warm acquisition pool to a donor or to an advocate, or they could, give you a certain amount of volunteer time. And then I think also, especially with social media, there's a pretty distinct correlation between size of email file and size of fan base. And if you can make the argument around the social media campaign to grow the fan base file, you can put some gooey numbers to that, I think, for the higher ups in finance. So I've had some luck with that.
Awesome. So now anyone, if you get any pushback, email Bethany. Ask her to jump in and help you.
I'm good at gooey numbers.
Yeah. Excellent. So moving forward, we're now running our multi-channel campaign, and we know that we can't simply just copy and paste the same content on every outlet that we have access to. Email needs to be treated as email. Facebook needs to be treated as Facebook. What works on Twitter should really be emphasized there. Jeff talked about this, and others talked about this in the recap as well. But how do we keep our message consistent without tiring out our supporters by using the literal same piece of content everywhere? How, have you seen organizations do that really well? Adapt an overall message to specific channels. How do you like to plan that kind of content management piece?
Yeah, I'm sorry that Michaela from Defenders of Wildlife isn't here, because I think that they do a really excellent job with this. From a process perspective, I think starting with a true editorial meeting is important. That step gets skipped a lot, and we still deal with, well, here's the copy decks for the email and things like that. But actually doing a true breakdown of what's the hierarchy of the story that you're telling. So kind of the primary bottom line, what's the sort of mid-level story, what are the tertiary facts that support it, and then depending on the medium, I think is where you then aim your content. So if you're dealing with something that is incredibly timely and succinct, like mobile, like Twitter, you just want to go for that primary headline. If you're dealing in direct mail and you've got a longer lead time and you can tell a more robust story, then you can go as deep into the editorial and the narrative arc as you want to go. But I think that planning step of identifying the different pieces of the story that you want to tell is critical.
This is Jeff from the Humane Society. I couldn't agree more. And in fact, if you're planning a campaign, we literally, as much as possible, plan the campaign arc well in advance. So for our year-end campaign, it's organized around video stories of animals that we've rescued. And, so we identify the animals, we produce the videos. It's the same campaign concepts over and over again. Email to video, ad to video. The video follows the same story arc each time, starting with the narrator, who is the person who actually rescued the animal. The animal is shown in a situation of cruelty and ends with the animal frolicking on the lawn with his new owner. And but we push out the videos one at a time for a year-end campaign over a period of 3 weeks. And all the tactics, all the donation forms, everything else is identical, but we just design the campaign around 3 different pieces of content. Another thing we do, I've seen others do quite well as well, is this concept of escalating actions, and this particularly works well on email. So, like for our SEAL campaign, our basic action is to sign the pledge to boycott seafood from Canada, and that's our entry-level action we do for list growth around the SEAL campaign. And then we have a secondary action we call Action 2, which is typically email the Canadian Prime Minister, a little bit higher bar. And then for people who've done both of those every year, we say, how can we freshen up this campaign? We create a higher bar still. One year we had this fun thing where we actually said, what would you do if Canada actually ended the commercial seal hunt? And we had options like, I'd take a bath in Canadian maple syrup and all this other stuff. And it was just a higher bar action for those who've taken the first 2 actions. And then we just roll this out and segment our file accordingly, based on the data, what we have, we know they've done. And so we have the same content, but it's leading to different actions that progressively get more. And of course, then we rope in, one-time giving and monthly giving on top of those.
Okay, so we have our content out there. We've created these story arcs well in advance. We've got, heartwarming videos of a pup being rescued and frolicking on the grass. I watch those videos all the time. My favorite are veterans returning home to their dogs. I have watched every video on YouTube that falls into that search criteria. But how do we know if it's working? Like, Jeff, you use the example, you have 3 different stories. How are you measuring in real time to know, oh gosh, story number 2, like something isn't working. No one is sharing this on Facebook, or this one is just not getting the clicks. How can we make sure we are measuring that in real time? What threshold is maybe our trigger that it isn't working, and then what do you do about it?
Well, for us, we do, for a similar campaign, we'll do daily reports comparing this year with the previous year. But to be honest, you're going to have a dud every now and then, and then the other element of your campaign has to make up for it. We have a hard time, I'd love to hear some of the other panelists speak to this, but a hard time forecasting online revenue. And in 2012, one of our 3 year-end videos got picked up by a couple of big media outlets, and basically, it was our version of viral. We just passed 1 million page views on the video, and so our numbers for 2012 were terrific because we just had more views on the video, and it's something we couldn't predict. So this year, of course, we had to control for last year's performance in this year's things, and we'll track donation participation rate and stuff like that, but at some point you have to have faith in your creative and know that you're not going to, some stories are going to resonate more than others, and you have to just plan your campaigns to build in the fact that you're going to have some great creative and some not so good creative in the mix. Probably not a very helpful answer, but.
Well, I think, that's end-of-year syndrome. It's the nail biter. If you're expecting to get 50% of your revenue in on your end of year, which starts earlier every year, now it's like September is end of year. I think that is nerve-wracking. So when there's a lot riding on it, everybody's watching it, everybody's paying attention to it, there's a real internal desire in the organization to tweak it if it's not hitting it out of the park right away. And I think all of us on this panel, and probably everybody on this call, has experienced that once or twice. You get a dud every now and again. The question is, why was it a dud? What lesson can you learn that you can apply and hopefully get your next campaigns to perform above the line so that it, as Jeff said, it equalizes itself, whether it's year over year or campaign over campaign through the fundraising year.
And I think that preparing yourself in advance for the duds, so if you know you have a campaign that you have to hit out of the park, like end of year for all of us, that is probably not the best time of year to be trying something that you've never tried before. And I know that may sound cowardly, but if you are banking on that money and you don't get a second shot at end of year, don't go off the reservation crazy with new creative. Test in campaigns where if you have a dud, it's not going to be catastrophic. So I actually am working with a client right now on planning out their next fiscal year campaigns, and we actually have that line in 3 of them where we've planned for a sinker because we're trying something completely new. And I think making that argument to the folks who look at your pro formas can be a little difficult, but if you find out what works, you can make that end of year hit it out of the park scenario work even better.
So, as it would be, it takes a bunch of staff to make all of this happen and successful. So, do you, explaining myself more, staffing isn't just about having staff churning out the work or the content or working on the video or anything like that. It also means getting them all together to think about it that whole time. So it isn't just, making sure that story looks great across different channels, but making sure, your internal channels, all of your departments also understand how that story and that ask and that campaign is rolling out. Do you guys have any suggestions or even your own experience where this has worked well, where there have been hurdles to getting inside the organization all working together in that integrated way?
I'm not sure who said it earlier as they were running through their key takeaways, but somebody said, you've got to all get in the room and identify and agree on your goals first. So what's it going to take? What do we want to get out of it? And then hold people to those agreements. Remember, we agreed that the important thing was we wanted to grow our house file this year, for example. So most of our efforts have to support that or include that as a tactic or an action. And I think that that's what starts it off on the right foot, because we're all running around, everybody wears a bunch of different hats, and we have to also remember the reactive. It's great to be proactive about your campaigns, but the reactive stuff happens. Priorities shift. So making some agreements ahead of time how you're going to handle it if deadlines slip or if someone gets pulled off and is required to do work elsewhere within the org. Plan on some of that stuff happening.
Excellent. Well, Anne has asked a question just under the wire, so I want to be sure we have time for it. She says, we're a very small nonprofit with 5 staff, all with various experience levels directly with social media. So how can we put social media campaigns together without spending a huge amount of money to hire experts from outside. Any tips for Anne?
Sure, this is Bethany. I think first thing is putting a social media campaign together. You have to define what your campaign goals are. And since being realistic with staff time and resources and experience, it's okay to say we don't know how to do this or we limitedly have time to do this. I think social media can be really a beautiful medium for us to work in because a lot of it we can do for free with a little creativity. So I think I would start small, agree on a goal, whether it's you want to increase your fan base by a certain amount, is it you're trying to test what sort of content your fan base likes. So I think it's really nailing that down and coming up with no more than 3 things that you want to learn or focus on. So I think that's where I would start.
Great.
Sure.
Yeah, and I would also just throw in the reminder that you're not going to have a successful campaign on social media if you haven't already started to engage with your community there. So before you try and launch an actual campaign, just invest in hearing from your community which channels they use, set up profiles on those channels, see what works, see what kind of content your community responds to, and then use that information gathering to inform what kind of campaign you would even want to invest in, so that at that point, whether you hired someone outside or you used an inside staff capacity for that campaign, you'll be so much more informed of what could work and what's possible than trying to go in blind. It looks like we have one last question here. Monica says, I see how people would feel good about giving to organizations that help baby seals and puppies and children. But how can you make it work when you talk about survivors of sexual assault, minority groups, single women victims of rape or social injustice, or things that big pocket donors, people with the money, are unable to relate to and often empathize with?
That's a great question. I feel incredibly fortunate in my career. I've worked for organizations that, small HIV/AIDS organizations. I've worked with Polaris Project in DC, and as well as some of the more puppies and kittens and easier sells. But I think universally, because I always was in that place of, oh, if I worked for American Cancer Society or something like that, it would be so much easier to raise the money, and it's not. Shockingly, I think it all boils down to how you make your donor feel like the hero. People want to help, and I think that is the ask that you have to make. And I think for people that have a really hard story to tell, like a Polaris Project where they're dealing with victims of human trafficking, or anything like that, it can be a gut-wrenching story to tell. So I think the pressure is really on the storytelling and the creative to how do you get that donor to see themselves as the hero. It's not about being able to relate to a sexual traffic victim's situation. It's being able to relate to the hope that you can give them. And it's the exact same kind of construct when it comes to, the new home you give an adopted pet or things like that. It's getting your donor to invest in that next chapter and in that hope.
One thing I'll add on that too is that I found when we really started looking at our copy is that we were don't be afraid to drive emotion with the donor. Oftentimes what we had got is we were afraid of the negative call. And if you're afraid of the negative call, if you're afraid of upsetting somebody so that they will call in, you can't stir emotion. So I don't know if this is the right term or not, but try to avoid, politically correctness to the point to where you're trying to dumb your message down to the point to where you're almost driving the emotion out of it, where you're just trying to state facts. You really, giving money is an emotional response to a need that they can identify with. And in order to do that, you also have to have a understanding within your organization that as you put things out there, like in human trafficking, there's an emotional message there, but you may have to really explain yourself. As an example, we had 4 stories that we had sign-offs on. Well, the 4th one I really hesitated testing because it mentioned rape. and I finally tested it, and it was one of the better performing ones because it drove emotion. And you are really telling your story, and oftentimes you can't sanitize it to the point where it's contrary, or it doesn't serve its purpose, or it doesn't help you. I hope that helps.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I know we've already gone a minute over, so thank you everyone for joining, staying around till the very end of the day for this discussion. Thank you to all the presenters for continuing to share. You already did a full session, and then you've come back to share even more of your brain. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. And thanks, IMAP, for hosting this awesome day.
Thanks, Amy. We really, really appreciate NTEN's involvement. I know for most of us, NTEN is such an important part of our career and our professional upbringing, so it's great to get to partner with you guys.
Awesome. Great. I'm glad to hear it. Anything I can do to help. Thanks, everyone, and please continue the conversation. Be part of all of this with everybody going forward.